Okay, let's jump right in. Welcome to The Explainer, everyone. Today, we've got an absolutely fascinating sociological journey to unpack. We are going to explore the story of the Rongmei people of Manipur, India, and look at the wild story of how their ancient belief system managed to survive against some truly incredible modern odds.
Everything we're diving into today is grounded directly in this rigorous study by Dr. Kamei Samson called The Resilience of Indigenous Religion. It's a completely impartial, academic deep dive into the survival mechanisms of a specific indigenous faith. And through this text, we're really going to focus on two main lenses. First, the evolution of a religion moving from purely oral traditions to written texts, and second, its intense, high-stakes struggle against external religious and political pressures.
So here's the big question, the paradox we're looking at today. How does an ancient, literally nameless religion rewrite its entire identity just to stay exactly the same? It's like a giant sociological puzzle, and to understand how this brilliant cultural defense mechanism actually works, well, we've got to go back to the beginning.
Section 1. An Ancient Nameless Faith. For centuries, the ancestors of the Rongmei people, who are part of the larger ZELIANGRONG group, didn't actually have a formal name for their religion. And honestly, why would they? They didn't need one. It was simply Pupu Chop, which loosely translates to the primordial or ancestral way. It wasn't a separate category of life. It was the whole shebang, their culture, their morals, and their connection to the divine, all wrapped up into one.
Now, this early faith was incredibly localized. There were no grand temples or printed scriptures. The entire belief system was held strictly in the memories of the people. Led by male elders and local priests, it relied heavily on oral histories, specific taboos, animal sacrifices, and these very village-centric rituals. But, as you can probably guess, this hyper-localized oral nature eventually made it incredibly vulnerable to a rapidly changing world.
Section 2. Conversion, Stigma, and Persecution.
As external forces started entering the region, particularly Christian missionaries, a really deep social divide emerged. The study notes that a rigid categorization began taking hold. Evangelical Christians started referring to themselves as Rani, meaning worshippers of God. On the flip side, they used a derogatory label for followers of the traditional faith, Jadonang, which literally translates to consumers of wine. This wasn't just casual name-calling, right? It was a profound stigmatization that directly attacked the pride of the indigenous practitioners.
And the pressure didn't stop at social stigma, it got dangerously physical. The text details a harrowing incident back in February 1994 in the Kupam area. Traditional villagers celebrating a festival were violently attacked by a Naga-armed group pushing a Nagaland for Christ agenda. The text explicitly says the traditionalists were forced to drink local wine at gunpoint, made to dance all night in the pouring rain, and tragically, a woman who had recently given birth actually died from the sheer shock of the intrusion. I mean, this was a literal existential threat.
So what we have here is a massive crucible. The traditionalists are being squeezed from all sides. You've got aggressive proselytization from evangelical groups, violent persecution from armed factions, and this overwhelming dread of cultural erasure. Interestingly, the study also points out they received a non-proselytizing support from Hindu organizations like the RSS, who actually encouraged them to preserve their ancestral ways. But at the end of the day, to survive this intense pressure cooker, the traditionalists realized one thing: adapt or disappear.
Section 3. The 1994 TRC, Reformation.
Which brings us to the climax of the struggle. Now, the seeds for change were actually planted way back in the 1920s by an anti-colonial rebel named Jadonang Malangmei, who kicked off some early religious reforms. But it was that tragic Kopum persecution incident in Feb 94 that served as the final spark. Just 2 months later, in April 1994, leaders like Professor Kamei urgently called the people together, formed the ZELIANGRONG Religious Council, and kicked off some massive formal modernizations.
The very first step? They gave their nameless faith a formal name, Tingkao Ragwang Chapriak, or TRC. This wasn't just branding. Adopting a name was a highly strategic sociological shield. By officially calling themselves the religion of the heavenly God, they secured equal footing. No one could dismiss them as just unorganized animists anymore. They carved out a recognized identity in a modern, multi-religious society.
But they absolutely didn't stop there. They cleverly adopted the exact institutional structures of the external forces that were threatening them. They started building Kalumkai, which are dedicated houses of worship, giving their youth an actual physical place to gather. They set up congregational prayers on Sundays and full moon days. And why Sunday?
specifically to keep their youth from drifting over to the attractive Sunday services of neighboring Christians. They also abolished those super expensive taboos and animal sacrifices, basically making the religion way more practical for modern everyday life.
Section 4. From oral to textual. Now let's pivot to our second key lens, and honestly, this might be the most profound shift of the whole story. Before this reform, the religion was entirely oral. If you wanted to pray or perform a ritual, you generally needed a local male priest or an elder. But the TRC reform flipped the script by printing their mythologies, prayers, and hymns and books using the Roman script. Almost overnight, the religion was democratized. It was suddenly accessible to the youth, to women, to literally anyone who could read.
Now you might be wondering, did putting an ancient oral religion into text somehow dilute its spiritual power? Well, according to the data, absolutely not. A whopping 83.9% of surveyed practitioners felt this new religious literature directly promoted their spiritual growth. So it didn't weaken their faith, it actively fueled it.
By writing it all down, they created this portable, unbreakable shield. Printing those hymns and prayers meant the youth could just pack up their faith and carry it with them anywhere. They could pray independently. The religion couldn't just be erased by displacing a village or losing a generation of elders anymore. Textualizing the faith basically guaranteed it would make it to the next generation.
Section 5. Changing to stay the same.
And that brings us right back to our opening paradox. The study's author uses this brilliant term, sincere atavism. The TRC followers completely modernized how they operate. They built temples, printed books, scheduled Sunday prayers. But despite all these massive conscious reformations, they deeply and sincerely believe their religion remains exactly the same as their primordial ancestors practiced it. They changed the mechanics of their faith so they could fiercely protect the soul of it, their polytheistic roots, their pantheon of gods, and their traditional cultural festivals.
The whole driving force behind this adaptation is a core dictum of the TRC movement. Loss of religion is loss of culture, and loss of culture is loss of identity. For the Rongmei people, giving up their ancestral pantheon meant losing their festivals, their dances, their literal identity. Keeping those gods alongside the new written texts wasn't just some theological debate, it was sheer cultural survival.
Which leaves us with this final, profound thought to consider. When a community writes down its unwritten past, names the nameless, and builds temples where there were absolutely none, does changing a belief system destroy its divinity, or does it actually guarantee its survival? It really is a massive testament to the resilience of human identity. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning how our past continues to shape our present.